Water Them Geraniums, Part 2, Past Caring, Henry Lawson. Next morning things looked a lot brighter. Things always look brighter in the morning, more so in the Australian bush, I should think, than in most other places. It's when the sun goes down on the dark bed of the lonely bush and the sunset flashes off a sea of fire and then fades and then glows out again like a bank of coals, then burns away to ashes. It's then that old things come home to one, and strange new old things too, that haunt and depress you terribly, that you can't understand. I often think how, at sunset, the past must come home to new chum black sheep, sent out to Australia and drifted into the bush. I used to think that they couldn't have much brains, or the loneliness would drive them mad. I decided to let James take the team for a trip or two. He could drive all right. He was a better businessman, and no doubt could manage better than me, as long as the novelty lasted. And I'd stay home for a week or so, till Mary got used to the place, or I could get a girl from somewhere to come and stay with her. The first weeks or few months of loneliness are the worst, as a rule. I believe, as they say, the first weeks in jail are. I was never there. I know it's so, with tramping or hard graft. The first day or two are twice as hard as any of the rest. But for my part, I could have never get used to loneliness and dullness. The last days used to be the worst with me. Then I'd have to make a move, or drink. When you've been too much and too long alone in a lonely place, you begin to do queer things and think queer thoughts, provided you have any imagination at all. You'll sometimes sit for an evening and watch the lonely track by the hour for a horseman or cart, or someone that's never likely to come that way. Someone, or a stranger, that you can't and don't expect to really see. I think that most men who've been alone in the bush for any length of time, and married couples too, are more or less mad. With married couples, it's generally the husband who is painfully shy and awkward when strangers come. The woman seems to stand the loneliness better and can hold her own with strangers, as a rule. It's only afterwards and looking back that you must see how queer you got. Shepherds and boundary riders who are alone for months must have the periodical spree at the nearest shanty, or they'd go raving mad. Drink is the only break in the awful monotony, and the yearly or half-yearly spree is the only thing they've got to look forward to. Keeps their minds fixed on something definite ahead. But Mary kept her head pretty well through the first months of loneliness, weeks rather, I should say, for it wasn't as bad as it might have been farther up country. There was generally someone came of a Sunday afternoon, a spring cart with a couple of women, or maybe a family, or a lanky, shy bush native or two lanky, shy horses. On a quiet Sunday, after I'd brought Jim home, Mary would dress him and herself just the same as if we were in town, make me get up on one end and put on a collar and take her and Jim for a walk along the creek. She said she wanted to keep me civilized. She tried to make a gentleman of me for years, but gave it up gradually. Well, it was the first morning on the creek. I was greasing the wagon wheels and James out after the horse and Mary hanging out clothes in an old print dress and a big ugly white hood, when I heard her being hailed as, "Hi, missus," from the front slip rails. It was a boy on horseback. He was a light-haired, very much freckled boy of 14 or 15, with a small head, but with limbs, especially his bare blotched shanks, that might have belonged to a grown man. He had a good face and frank grey eyes. An old, nearly black cabbage tree hat rested on the butts of his ears, turning them out at right angles from his head, and rather dirty sprouts they were. He wore a dirty, torn Crimean shirt and a pair of man's moleskin trousers rolled up above the knees, with a wide waistband gathered under a green hide belt. I noticed later on that even when he wore trousers short enough for him, he was always rolling them up above the knees when on horseback, for some reason of his own, to suggest leggings perhaps, for he had them rolled up in all weathers, and he wouldn't have bothered to save them from the sweat of the horse, even if that horse ever sweated. He was seated astride a 3-bushel bag thrown across the ridge pole of a big grey horse with a coffin-shaped head, and built astern something after the style of a roughly put-up hip-roofed box bark humpy. His colour was like old box bark too, a dirty bluish grey, and at one time, when I saw his rump looming out of the scrub, I really thought it was some old shepherd's hut that I hadn't noticed there before. When he cantered, it was like the humpy starting off on its corner posts. "Are you Mrs. Wilson?" asked the boy. "Yes," said Mary. "Well, my mother told me to ride across to see if you wanted anything. We killed last night, and I fetched a piece of your cow." "Piece of what?" asked Mary. He grinned and handed a sugar bag across the rail with something heavy in the bottom of it. That nearly jerked Mary's arm out when she took it. It was a piece of beef that looked as if it had been cut off with a wood axe, but it was fresh and clean. "Oh, I'm so glad," cried Mary. She was always impulsive, save to me sometimes. "I was just wondering where we were going to get any fresh meat. How kind of your mother. Tell her I'm very much obliged to her indeed." And she felt behind her for a poor little purse she had. "And now, how much did your mother say it would be?" The boy blinked at her, scratched his head. "How much will it be?" he repeated, puzzled. "Oh, how much does it weigh, I suppose you mean? Well, it ain't been weighed at all. We ain't got no scales. A butcher does all that sort of thing. We just kills it, cooks it and eats it, and goes by guess. What won't keep, we salts down in the cask. I reckon it weighs about a ton by the weight of it, if you want to know. Mother thought that if she sent any more, it'd go bad before you could scoff it. I can't see—" Yes, said Mary, getting confused. "But what I want to know is, how do you manage when you sell it?" He glared at her, scratched his head. "Sell it? Why, we only goes halves in a steer with someone, or sells steer to the butcher, or maybe some meat to a party of fencers, or surveyors, or tank sinkers, or them sort of people." Yes. But what I want to know is, how much am I to send your mother for this?" "How much for what?" "Money, of course, you stupid boy," said Mary. "You seem a very stupid boy." Then he saw what she was driving at. He began to fling his heels convulsively against the sides of his horse, jerking his body backward and forward at the same time, as if to wind up and start some clockwork machinery inside the horse that made it go, and seemed to need repairing or oiling. "We ain't that sort of people, missus," he said. "We don't sell meat to new people that comes to settle here." Then, jerking his thumb contemptuously towards the ridges, "Go over to Wall's if you want to buy meat. They sell meat to strangers." Wall was the biggest squatter over the ridges. "Oh," said Mary, "I'm so sorry. Thank your mother for me. She is kind." "Oh, that's nothing. She said to tell you she'd be up as soon as she can. She'd have come up yesterday evening. She thought you'd feel lonely, coming new to a place like this, but she couldn't get up." The machinery inside the old horse showed signs of starting. You almost heard the wooden joints creak as he lurched forward, like an old propped-up humpy when the rotting props give way. But at the sound of Mary's voice, he settled back on his foundations again. Must have been a very poor selection that couldn't afford a better spare horse than that. "Reach me that there lump of wood, would you, missus?" said the boy, and he pointed to one of my spreads for team chains that lay inside the fence. "I'll fling it back again over the fence when I get this old cow started." But wait a minute. I've forgotten your mother's name," said Mary. He grabbed at his thatch impatiently. "Me mother? Oh, the old woman's name is Mrs. Spicer." "Get it up, can't you?" He twisted himself round and brought the stretcher down on one of the horse's points, he had many, with a crack that must have jarred his wrist. "Do you go to school?" asked Mary. There was a 3 days a week school over the ridges at Wall Station. "Nah," he jerked out, keeping his legs going. "Me? Why, I'm doing on for 15. The last teacher at Wall's finished me. I'm going to Queensland next month, droving." Queensland border was over 300 miles away. "Finished you? How?" asked Mary. "Me education, of course. How do you expect me to start this horse when you keep talking?" He split the spread over the horse's point, threw the pieces over the fence and was off, his elbows and legs flinging wildly, as the old saw stool lumbering along the road like an old working bullock trying to canter. That horse wasn't a trotter. And next month he did start for Queensland. He was a younger son, and a surplus boy on a wretched, poverty-stricken selection. And as there was nothing doing in the district, his father, in a burst of fatherly kindness, I suppose, made him a present of the old horse and a new pair of blucher boots, gave him an old saddle and a coat, and he started for the Never-Never country. And I'll bet he got there, but I'm doubtful if the old horse did. Mary gave the boy 5 shillings, and I don't think he had anything more except a clean shirt and an extra pair of white socks. Spicer's farm was a big bark humpy on a patchy clearing in the native apple tree scrub. The clearing was fenced by a light dog-legged fence of sapling poles resting on forks and X-shaped uprights, and the dusty ground around the house was almost entirely covered with cattle dung. There was no attempt at cultivation when I came to live on the creek, but there were old furrow marks amongst the stumps of another shapeless patch in the scrub near the hut. There was a wretched sapling cowyard and calf pen, and a cow bale with one sheet of bark over it for shelter. There was no dairy to be seen, and I suppose the milk was set in one of the 2 skillion rooms or lean-tos behind the hut, and another was the boys' bedroom. The Spicers kept a few cows and steers and had 30 or 40 sheep. Mrs. Spicer used to drive down the creek once a week in her rickety old spring cart to Cobora with butter and eggs. The hut was nearly as bare inside as it was out. Just a frame of round timber, sapling poles, covered with bark. The furniture was permanent, unless you rooted it up. Like in our kitchen, a rough slab table on stakes driven into the ground, and seats made the same way. Mary told me afterwards that the beds in the bag and bark partitioned off room, Mother's bedroom, were simply poles laid side by side on cross pieces supported by stakes driven into the ground, with straw mattresses and some worn-out bedclothes. Mrs. Spicer had an old patchwork quilt in rags and the remains of a white one. Mary said it was pitiful to see how these things would be spread over the beds to hide them as much as possible when she went down there. A packing case with something like an old print skirt draped around it, and a cracked looking-glass without a frame on top was the dressing table. There were a couple of gin cases for a wardrobe. The boys' beds were 3-bushel bags stretched between poles fastened to uprights. The floor was the original surface, tramped hard, worn uneven with so much sweeping, with puddles in rainy weather when the roof leaked. Mrs. Spicer used to stand old tins, dishes and buckets under as many of the leaks as she could. The saucepans, kettles and boilers were old kerosene tins and billies. They used kerosene tins too, cut long ways in halves for setting the milk in. The plates and cups were of tin. There were 2 or 3 cups without saucers, and a crockery plate or 2. Also 2 mugs cracked and without handles, one with "For a good boy," and the other with "For a good girl" on it. But all these were kept on the mantel shelf for ornaments and for company. They were the only ornaments in the house, save a little wooden clock that hadn't gone for years. Mrs. Spicer had a superstition that she had some things packed away from the children. The pictures were cut from old copies of the Illustrated Sydney News and pasted onto the bark. I remember this because I remembered long ago the Spencers, who were our neighbours when I was a boy, had the walls of their bedroom covered with illustrations of the American Civil War, cut from illustrated London papers. I used to sneak into Mother's bedroom with Fred Spencer whenever we got the chance, and gloat over the prints. I gave him a blade of a pocket knife once for taking me in there. I saw very little of Spicer. He was a big, dark-haired and whiskered man. I had an idea that he wasn't a selector at all, only a dummy for the squatter of the Kubora run. You see, selectors were allowed to take up land on runs or pastoral leases. The squatters kept them off as much as possible by all manner of dodges and paltry persecution. The squatter would get up much freehold as he could afford, select as much land as the law allowed one man to take up, then employed dummy selectors, to take up bits of land that he fancied about his run and hold them for him. Spicer seemed gloomy and unsociable. He was seldom at home. He was generally supposed to be away shearing or fencing, or working on somebody's station. It turned out that the last 6 months he was away, it was on the evidence of a cask of beef and a hide with the brand cut out, found in his camp on a fencing contract up country, and which he and his mates couldn't account for satisfactorily, while the squatter could. Then the family lived mostly on bread and honey, or bread and treacle, or bread and dripping and tea. Every ounce of butter and every egg was needed for the market, to keep them in flour, tea, and sugar. Mary found out, but couldn't help them much, except by stuffing the children with bread and meat, or bread and jam, whenever they came up to our place. For Mrs. Spicer was proud with the pride that lies down in the end, turns its face to the wall and dies. Once when Mary asked Annie, the eldest girl at home, if she was hungry, she denied it, but she looked it. A ragged mite she had with her explained things. The little fellow said, "Mother told Annie not to say we was hungry if you asked, but if you give us anything to eat, we was to say, 'Thank you, Mrs. Wilson.' I wouldn't have told you a lie, but I thought Jimmy would split on me, Mrs. Wilson," said Annie. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson." She was not a big woman. She was gaunt and flat-chested, and her face was burned to a brick, as they say out there. She had brown eyes, nearly red, and a little wild-looking at times, and a sharp face, ground sharp by hardship, the cheeks drawn in. She had an expression like a woman who's been very curious and suspicious at one time, and wanted to know everybody's business and hear everything, and had lost all her curiosity, without losing the expression of the quick, suspicious movements of the head. I don't suppose you understand. I can't explain it any other way. She was not more than 40. I remember the first morning I saw her. I was going up the creek to look at the selection for the first time, and called at the hut to see if she had a bit of fresh mutton, as I had none and was sick of corned beef. "Yes, of course," she said, in a sharp, nasty tone, as if to say, Is there anything more you want while the shop's open?" I'd met just the same sort of woman years before while I was carrying swag between the shearing sheds and the awful scrubs out west of the Darling River, so I didn't turn on my heels and walk away. I waited for her to speak again. "Come inside," she said, "and sit down. I see you've got the wagon outside. I suppose your name's Wilson, ain't it? You're thinking about taking on Harry Marshfield's selection up the creek, so I heard. Wait till I fry you a chop and boil the billy." Her voice sounded more than anything else like a voice coming out of a phonograph. I heard one in Sydney the other day, and not like a voice coming out of her. But sometimes, when she got outside her everyday life on this selection, she spoke in a sort of lost, groping in the dark kind of voice. She didn't talk much this time, just spoke in a mechanical way of the drought and the hard times, and butter and eggs being down, and her husband and eldest son being away, and that making it so hard for her. I don't know how many children she had. I never got a chance to count them, for they were nearly all small and shy as pickaninnies, and used to run and hide whenever anybody came. They were almost nearly as black as pickaninnies too. She must have averaged a baby a year for years, and God only knows how she got over her confinement. Once they said she only had a black gin with her. She had an elder boy and a girl, but she seldom spoke of them. The girl, Lisa, was in service in Sydney. I'm afraid I knew what that meant. The elder son was away. He had been a bit of a favourite round there, it seemed. Someone might ask her, "How's your son, Jack, Mrs. Spicer?" Or, "Heard of Jack lately? And where is he now?" "Oh, he's somewhere up country," she'd say in the groping voice. Or, "He's droving in Queensland, or shearing on the Darling the last time I heard from him. We ain't had a line from him since, let's see, since Christmas forelast." And she'd turned her haggard eyes on a helpless, hopeless sort of way towards the west, towards up country and out back. The eldest girl at home was 9 or 10, with a little old face and lines across her forehead. She had an older expression than her mother. Tommy went to Queensland, as I told you. The eldest son at home, Bill, older than Tommy, was a bit wild. I've passed the place in smothering hot mornings in December, when the droppings about the cowyard had crumpled to dust that rose in the warm, sickly sunrise wind, and seen that woman at work in the cowyard, bailing up, leg-roping cows, milking, or hauling at a rope round the neck of a half-grown calf that was too strong for her, and she was tough as fencing wire, or humping great buckets of sour milk to the pigs or the poddies, hand-fed calves in the pen. I'd get off the horse and give her a hand sometimes with a young steer, or a cranky old cow that wouldn't bail up and threatened her with her horns. She'd say, "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Do you think we're ever going to have any rain?" I've ridden past the place on bitter, black, rainy mornings in June or July, and seen her trudging about the yard. That was ankle-deep in black, liquid filth, with an old pair of blucher boots on and an old coat of her husband's, or maybe a 3-bushel bag over her shoulders. I've seen her climbing on the roof by means of the water cask at the corner and trying to stop a leak by shoving a piece of tin under the bark. And when I'd fixed the leak, "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. This drop of rain's a blessing. Come in and dry by the fire. I'll make you a cup of tea." And if I was in a hurry, "Come in, man alive, come in and dry yourself a bit till the rain holds up. You can't go home like this. You'll get your death of cold." I've even seen her in the terrible drought, climbing she-oaks and apple trees by a makeshift ladder and awkwardly lopping off boughs to feed the starving cattle. "Just trying to keep the milkers alive till the rain comes." They said that when the pleuropneumonia was in the district and amongst her cattle, she bled and physicked them herself and fed those that were down with slices of half-ripe pumpkins from a crop that had failed. One day she told Mary, there was a big barren heifer that we called Queen Elizabeth that was down with the pleura. She'd been down for 4 days and hadn't moved, when one morning I dumped some wheaten chaff. We had a few bags that Spicer brought home. I dumped it in front of her nose, and would you believe me, Mrs. Wilson? She stumbled onto her feet and chased me all the way to the house. I had to pick up me skirts and run. Wasn't it ridiculous? They had a sense of the ridiculous, most of these poor sun-dried bushwomen. I fancy that helped save them from madness. We nearly lost all our milkers, she told Mary. I remember one day Tommy came running to the house and screamed, Mother, there's another milker down with the pleura, just as if it was great news. Well, Mrs. Wilson, I was dead beat, and I given in. I just sat down to have a good cry, felt for my handkerchief. It was a rag of a handkerchief full of holes. All me others was in the wash. Without seeing what I was doing, I put me finger through one hole in the handkerchief and me thumb through the other, and poked me fingers into me eyes instead of wiping them. Then I had to laugh. There's a story that once when the bush, or rather grass, fires were out all along the creek on Spicer's side, Wall's station hands were up above our place, trying to keep the fire back from the boundary, and towards evening one of the men happened to think of the Spicers. They saw smoke down that way. Spicer was away from home, and they had a small crop of wheat, nearly ripe on the selection. My God, that poor devil of a woman will be burnt out if she ain't already, shouted young Billy Wall. Come along, 3 or 4 of you chaps. It was shearing time, and there were plenty of men on the station. They raced down the creek to Spicer's and were just in time to save the wheat. She had her sleeves tucked up and was beating out the burning grass with a bough. She'd been at it for an hour, was black as a gin. They said. She only said when they turned the fire, Thank you. Wait and I'll make some tea. After tea the first Sunday, she came to see us. Mary asked, Don't you feel lonely, Mrs. Spicer, when your husband goes away? Well, no, Mrs. Wilson, she said in the groping sort of voice. I used to once. I remember when we lived on the Cudgegong River. We lived in a brick house then. The first time Spicer had to go away from home, I nearly fretted me eyes out. And he was only going shearing for a month. I must have been a fool. But then we were only just married a little while. He's been away droving in Queensland as long as 18 months at a time since then. But her voice seemed to grope in the dark more than ever. I don't mind. I somehow seem to have got past caring. Besides, Spicer was a very different man then to what he is now. He's got so moody and gloomy at home he hardly ever speaks. Mary sat silent for a minute, thinking. Then Mrs. Spicer roused herself. Oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. You mustn't take any notice of me, Mrs. Wilson. I don't often go on like this. I do believe I'm getting a bit ratty at times. Must be the heat and the dullness. But once or twice afterwards, she referred to a time when Spicer was a different man to what he was now. I walked home with her a piece along the creek. She said nothing for a long time, seemed to be thinking in a puzzled way. Then she said suddenly, What did you bring her for? She's only a girl. I beg pardon, Mrs. Spicer. Oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. Believe me, I'm getting ratty. You mustn't take any notice of me, Mrs. Wilson. She wasn't much company for Mary, and often, when she had a child with her, she'd start taking notice of the baby while Mary was talking, which used to exasperate Mary. But poor Mrs. Spicer couldn't help it, and she seemed to hear all the same. Her great trouble was that she couldn't get no regular schooling for the children. I learns them as much as I can, but I don't get a minute to call me own, and I'm generally that dead beat at night. I'm fit for nothing. Mary had some of the children up now and then later on and taught them a little. When she first offered to do so, Mrs. Spicer laid hold of the handiest youngster and said, "There, do you hear that? Mrs. Wilson's going to teach you, and it's more than you deserve." The youngster had been crying over something. "Now go and say thank you, Mrs. Wilson, and if you ain't good and don't do as she tells you, I'll break every bone in your bloody body." The poor little devil stammered something and escaped. The children were sent by turns over to Walls to Sunday school. When Tommy was at home, he had a new pair of elastic-sided boots, and there was no end of rows about them in the family, for the mother made him lend them to his sister Annie to go to Sunday school in her turn. There were only 3 pairs of anyway decent boots in the family, and these were saved for great occasions. The children were always as clean and tidy as possible when they came to our place. And I think the saddest and most pathetic sight on the face of God's earth is the children of very poor people made to appear well. The broken, worn-out boots, polished or greased, the blackened, inked pieces of string for laces, the clean, patched pinafores over the wretched, threadbare frocks. Behind the little row of children, hand in hand, no matter where they are, I always see the worn face of the mother. Towards the end of the first year in the selection, our little girl came. I'd sent Mary to Gulgong for 4 months that time. When she came back with the baby, Mrs. Spicer used to come up pretty often. She came up several times when Mary was ill to lend a hand. She wouldn't sit down and console Mary, or waste her time asking questions, or talking about the time when she was ill herself. She'd take off her hat, a shapeless little lump of black straw she wore for visiting, give her hair a quick brush with the palm of her hands, roll up her sleeves, and set to work to tidy up. She seemed to take most pleasure in sorting out the children's clothes and dressing them. Perhaps she used to dress her own like that in the days when Spicer was a different man from what he was now. She seemed interested in the fashion plates of some women's journals we had, and used to study them with an interest that puzzled me, for she was not likely to go in for fashion. She never talked of her early girlhood, but Mary, from some things she noticed, was inclined to think that Mrs. Spicer had been fairly well brought up. For instance, Dr. Ballad from Coogagong came out to see Wall's wife and drove up the creek to our place on his way back to see how Mary and the baby were getting on. Mary got out some crockery and some table napkins she'd packed away for occasions like this, and she said that the way Mrs. Spicer handled the things and helped set the tables, though she did it in a mechanical sort of way, convinced her that she'd been used to table napkins at one time in her life. Sometimes after a long pause in the conversation, Mrs. Spicer would say suddenly, "Oh, I don't think I'll come next week, Mrs. Wilson." "Why, Mrs. Spicer?" "Because the visits doesn't do me any good. I get the dismals afterwards." "Why, Mrs. Spicer, what on earth do you mean?" "Oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. You mustn't take any notice of me." And she'd put on her hat, kiss the children, Mary too, sometimes as if she mistook her for a child, and go. Mary thought her a little mad at times, but I seemed to understand. Once when Mrs. Spicer was sick, Mary went down to her, and down again next day, and she was coming away the second time. Mrs. Spicer said, "I wish you wouldn't come down any more until I'm on me feet, Mrs. Wilson. The children can do for me." "Why, Mrs. Spicer?" "Oh, well, the place is in such a muck, and it hurts me." We were the aristocrats of Lay's Creek. whenever we drove down on Sunday afternoon to see Mrs. Spicer. And as soon as we got near enough for them to hear the rattle of the cart, we'd see the children running to the house as fast as they could and hear them screaming, "Oh, Mother, here comes Mr. and Mrs. Wilson in their spring cart." And we'd see her bustle round, and 2 or 3 fowls fly out the front door, and she'd lay hold of a broom, made of a bound bunch of broom stuff, coarse reedy grass or bush from the ridges, with a stick stuck in it, and flick out the floor, with a flick or 2 round in front of the door, perhaps. The floor nearly always needed at least 1 flick of the broom on account of the fowls. Or she'd catch a youngster and scrub his face with a wet end of a towel, or twist the towel around her finger and dig out his ears, as if she was anxious to have him hear every word that was going to be said. No matter what state the house was in, she'd always say, "I was just expecting you, Mrs. Wilson." And she was original in that way, anyway. She had an old patched and darned white tablecloth that she used to spread on the table when we were there. As a matter of course, "The other's in the wash, so you must excuse this, Mrs. Wilson." But I saw by the eyes of the children that the cloth was a rather wonderful thing to them. "I must really get some more knives and forks next time in Cobra," she'd say. "The children break 'em loose, till I'm ashamed to ask Christians to sit down to the table." She had many bush yarns, some of them very funny, some of them rather ghastly, but all interesting, and with a grim sort of humour about them. But the effect was often spoilt by her screaming at the children to "Drive out them fowls, can't you?" or "Take your Morleys," hands, "out of the sugar," or "Don't touch Mrs. Wilson's baby with them dirty Morleys," or "Don't stand staring at Mrs. Wilson with your mouth and ears in that vulgar way." Poor woman. She seemed everlastingly nagging at the children. It was a habit, but they didn't seem to mind. Most bush women get the nagging habit. I remember one who had the prettiest, dearest, sweetest, most willing and affectionate little girl I think I ever saw, and she nagged that child from daylight till dark, and after it. Taking it all round, I think that the nagging habit in a mother is often worse on ordinary children, and more deadly on sensitive youngsters than the drinking habit of a father. One of the yarns Mrs. Spicer told us was about a squatter she knew who used to go wrong in his head every now and again and try to commit suicide. Once when the station hand, who was watching him, had his eye off him for a minute, he hanged himself to a beam in the stable. The men ran in and found him hanging and kicking. "They let him hang for a while," said Mrs. Spicer, "till he went black in the face and stopped kicking. Then they cut him down, threw a bucket of water over him." "Why on earth did they let the man hang for?" asked Mary. "To give him a good bellyful of it. They thought it would cure him of trying to hang himself again." "Well, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard of," said Mary. "That's just what the magistrate said, Mrs. Wilson," said Mrs. Spicer. "One morning," said Mrs. Spicer, "Spice had gone off on his horse somewhere. I was alone with the children, when a man came to the door and said, 'For God's sake, woman, give me a drink.' Lord only knows where he came from. He was dressed like a new chum. His clothes was good, but he looked as if he'd been sleeping in 'em for the bush for a month. He was very shaky. I had some coffee that morning, so I gave him some in a pint pot. He drank it. Then he stood on his head till he tumbled over. And he stood on his feet and said, 'Thank you, Mum.' I was so surprised, I didn't know what to say. I just said, 'Would you like some more coffee?' 'Yes, thank you,' he said, 'about 2 quarts.' I nearly filled the pint pot, and he drank it, stood on his head as long as he could, and when he got right up, he said, 'Thank you, Mum. It's a fine day.' Then he walked off. He had 2 saddle straps in his hands." "Why? "What did he stand on his head for?" asked Mary. "To wash it up and down, I suppose. To get twice as much taste to the coffee. He had no hat. I sent Tommy across the walls to tell him there was a man wandering about the bush in the horrors of drink, and to get someone to ride for the police. But they were too late, for he hanged himself that night." "Oh, Lord!" cried Mary. "Yeah, right close to here, just down the creek, where the track to Walls branches off. Tommy found him while he was out after the cows, hanging to the branch of a tree with 2 saddle straps." Mary stared at her, speechless. "Tommy came home yelling with fright. I sent him over to Walls at once. After breakfast, the minute my eyes was off them, the children slipped away and went down there. They came back screaming at the top of their voices. I did give it to them. I reckon they won't want to see a dead body again in a hurry. Every time I'd mention it, they'd huddle together or catch hold of me skirts and howl. 'You'll go again when I tell you not to,' I'd say. 'Oh, no, Mother,' they'd howl. 'You want to see a man hanging?' I said. 'Oh, don't, Mother, don't talk about it.' 'You wouldn't be satisfied till you see it,' I'd say. 'You had to see it or burst. You're satisfied now, ain't you?' 'Oh, don't, Mother.' 'You run all the way there, I suppose.' 'Don't, Mother.' 'But you run faster back, didn't you?' 'Don't, Mother.' 'But,' said Mrs. Spicer in conclusion, 'I'm in down to see it myself, before they was up.' 'And ain't you afraid to live alone here, after all these horrible things?' asked Mary. 'Well, no, I don't mind. I seem to have gotten past caring for anything now. I felt it a little when Tommy went away, the first time I felt anything for years. But I'm over that now. Haven't you got any friends in the district, Mrs. Spicer?' 'Oh, yeah. There's me married sister near Cobra, and a married brother near Dubbo. He's got a station. They wanted to take me and the children between them, or take some of the younger children. But I couldn't bring my mind to break up the home. I wanted to keep the children together as much as possible. There's enough of them gone, God knows. But it's a comfort to know that there's someone to see them if anything happens to me.' One day, I was on my way home with the team that day. Annie Spicer came running up the creek, in terrible trouble. 'Oh, Mrs. Wilson, something terrible's happened at home. A trooper, mounted policeman, they called them mounted troopers out here, a trooper came and took Billy.' Billy was the eldest son at home. 'What? It's true, Mrs. Wilson.' 'What for? What did the policeman say?' He said, 'I'm very sorry, Mrs. Spicer, but I want William.' It turned out that William was wanted on account of a horse missed from Walls Station and sold down country. 'And Mother looked awful,' sobbed Annie, 'and now she'll only sit stock still and stare in front of her, and won't take no notice of any of us. Oh, it's awful, Mrs. Wilson. The policeman said he'd tell Aunt Emma, Mrs. Spicer's sister in Cobra, and send her out, but I had to come to you, and I've run all the way.' James put the horse to the cart and drove Mary down. Mary told me all about it when I came home. I found her just as Annie said, but she broke down and cried in my arms. Oh, Joe, it was awful. She didn't cry like a woman. I heard a man at Haviland cry at his brother's funeral, and it was just like that. She came round a bit after a while. Her sister's with her now. Oh, Joe, you must take me away from the bush. Later on, Mary said, How the oaks are sighing tonight, Joe. Next morning I rode across to Walls Station and tackled the old man. But he was a hard man, and he wouldn't listen to me. In fact, he ordered me off the station. I was a selector, and that was enough for him. But young Billy Wall rode after me. Look here, Joe, he said. It's a bloody shame, all for the sake of a horse. And as if that poor devil of a woman hasn't had enough to put up with already, I wouldn't do it for 20 horses. I'll tackle the boss, and if he won't listen to me, I'll walk off the run for the last time if I have to carry my swag. Billy Wall managed it. The charge was withdrawn, and we got young Billy Spicer off up country. But poor Mrs. Spicer was never the same after that. She seldom came to our place unless Mary dragged her, so to speak. And then she would talk of nothing but her last trouble, till her visits were painful to look forward to. If it only could have been kept quiet, for the sake of the other children. They're all I think of now. I tried to bring 'em all up decent, but I suppose it was my fault, somehow. It's the disgrace that's killing me. I can't bear it. I was at home one Sunday with Mary and a jolly bush girl named Maggie Charlesworth, who rode over sometimes from Wall's station. And we got to talking about Mrs. Spicer. Maggie was very warm about old Wall. "I expected Mrs. Spicer up today," said Mary. "She seems better lately." "Why?" cried Maggie Charlesworth. "If that ain't Annie, coming running along the creek. Something's the matter." We all jumped up and ran out. "What is it, Annie?" cried Mary. "Oh, Mrs. Wilson, Mother's asleep and we can't wake her." "What?" "It's the truth, Mrs. Wilson." "How long's she been asleep?" "Since last night." "Oh, my God, since last night?" "No, Mrs. Wilson, not all the time. She woke once about daylight this morning. She called me and said she didn't feel well, and I'd have to manage the milking." "Was that all she said?" "No. She said not to go for you. She said to feed the pigs and calves, and she said to be sure and water them geraniums." Mary wanted to go, but I wouldn't let her. James and I saddled our horses and rode down the creek. Mrs. Spicer looked very different from what she did when I last saw her alive. It was some time before we could believe that she was dead, but she was past caring right enough.